The following is an original production of AZPM News.
For AZPM, I'm Mark McLemore, and this is Arizona Spotlight. Coming up, legal observers have been in the news because of ICE-driven violence around the country. Meet two local volunteers who value democracy and civil rights more than playing it safe. Who will be the true voices of tomorrow? Learn about the NPR Student Podcast Challenge for 2026. Paul McCartney and Wings, Tiki Collectors, and a rock and roll landmark. Find out about 3 documentaries that are having theatrical premieres as part of FilmFest Tucson's upcoming series. And how do you teach economics to a 3-year-old? Maybe they're the ones who should be teaching us. Our storyteller this month is Ethel Lee Miller. Those stories are next on Arizona Spotlight. 2 of the U.S. citizens killed by federal officers in Minneapolis last month have been referred to as legal observers, grassroots volunteers who show up to immigration enforcement incidents to bear witness and remind people of their constitutional rights. Danielle Camara has a closer look.
In Tucson and throughout the country, rapid responders take video of immigration enforcement in public spaces, provide Know Your Rights guidance, and work to support affected communities. I sat down with Dugan Meyer and Leslie Carlson last summer as immigration enforcement was ramping up to talk about this work.
Rapid response, at the center of it is the community member who is being terrorized, chased, surveilled, whatever it might be. We have a hotline, and so there are people who answer the hotline, and those people must be bilingual. And then when somebody calls the hotline, they determine if that warrants calling an alert. And if they do, they send a text to all of the people who are trained to be observers. And then those who are able go to the location where there is a need. Our job is to do anything there is to do to support if there's a direct impact on somebody being detained or a neighborhood being surveilled. We document it with phones. We do not interfere with law enforcement. We are careful to respect any community members that are impacted so that we respect their privacy. And then we also are trained on Know Your Rights, both for ourselves as observers, but also Know Your Rights for directly impacted people.
Anything that we can do to kind of document what's happening and in order to hold accountable our public officials, the different police agencies, to learn about what's happening. And so most of the time we can't intervene to stop what's happening, but at the least we can document it, and we can offer, if the person being affected or detained wants to give us information, to get in contact with family or something like that. And then we can educate people in these communities, as Leslie said. So even beyond an actual alert call, part of our work is sort of an educational project.
Can you just explain to me a little bit about what you have seen at these events?
We often see at the situations that are called, ICE is present or other police agencies. Oftentimes an observer might document what's happening with a video. We usually try to ask the police present what's happening. So sometimes they don't tell us. In those cases, we might still recognize that ICE is there. For instance, there's a man wearing a mask in an unmarked car. As far as I know, that's generally the only police agency that's doing that right now. But often it is unclear. And this is part of the thing that we are trying to sort of raise awareness about, is that lack of clarity is a tool to kind of terrorize neighbors. In terms, though, of what exactly is happening, sometimes there have been calls that are very clearly immigration raids on, say, businesses or on homes. Oftentimes, we will come to an incident that clearly originated for some other reason, like a traffic stop. We're also, again, just trying to sort of raise awareness about the scale of what's happening. It's happening all across the country, in large cities and small cities, and certainly in Tucson.
And then can you guys just talk a little bit about what law enforcement in these incidents where you're observing, what their reaction has been to your presence and how they treat you when you're out there?
we've always been very respectful of law enforcement, but they would sometimes readily tell us. I would say, hi, I'm here as an observer for people that might be impacted by immigration enforcement. Well, if you just stay back over there. Okay, what is this about? They would tell me. Now they don't talk. They mostly don't even speak to you. And so that's when our careful observation and our photographs and our videos and continuing to politely press them for more information.
We're within our rights to ask. And in fact, I think we believe our responsibility to ask what's happening in our neighborhoods. One thing that we are trying to do, right, is gather information for this phenomenon that has surprised all of us, which is the scope and number of unmarked police vehicles from all different agencies that are driving around our city among us all day, every day.
Do you guys feel overwhelmed with this task? Like, does it feel like you're going to be able to make a difference or have an impact?
I think that this has always been the way that people in all eras of our history, and other countries too, but just thinking of our own, people on the ground always show up, and the impacted people are often the ones that show up first and bear the most risk and lead everybody else. And so that's true now. People who see something wrong and see unfairness and see persecution, it's not okay with them. And that's really happening in this country right now. People who are not at all activists and have never gone to a protest or anything are like, this is wrong. I don't like this. But then from a systems perspective, it's not just people at the grassroots. We also have elected officials who are part of the system of accountability, or news media covering things. So important for people to not be kept in the dark about what's going on. And so everybody has a role to play, and we support one another in those roles, and they're all critical to work as a system of rising up and saying, this is not how we understand the country that we grew up in.
One thing that is really wonderful about this group is that it is multi-generational. It's people who are like regular people. You don't need particular skills to have done this before. There are many ways people can contribute. And the thing that does tie us all together is that love for our neighbors, basically, or the frustration that we have with persecution, right? And that's a really good thing to share in common with other people. And it's a thing that you can build groups around.
For Arizona Spotlight, I'm Danielle Kamara.
Volunteers from the community can become legal observers after going through a training led by experienced observers and legal experts. We have a link on the Spotlight page at AZPM for more information. The voices of tomorrow are already here, their young minds being shaped by world events and access to more technology than ever before. NPR wants to help find these voices now and bring their work to listeners around the world through the annual Student Podcast Challenge. Joining me now are two friends from NPR headquarters to tell us about this year's contest, which is open to all students in grades 4 through 12.
I'm Steve Drummond. I'm a senior editor at NPR, and for 8 years now, worked on our Student Podcast Challenge.
Yay. My name is Janet Ujangli. I'm a producer on NPR's education team, and I get to run the Student Podcast Challenge with Steve on the ed team.
Everybody wants to be a podcaster. Children grow up in this environment with all this content, and they think, wow, that would be easy. And so I just wonder what kind of comments you may have heard from the students who have participated in past challenges about just how easy they found this.
Yep. The most common one we get is from students who say, a couple of our winners have said this. I never listened to NPR. I never heard NPR before. And then suddenly they've told a story and they've made a podcast. And that's been wonderful. We also hear about how much work it takes. Finding the passion, finding the right story, going out in the community and reporting and interviewing civic leaders or your family members or whatever. There's a lot involved here, but we find that the students are getting better and better at it every year.
Janet, I understand that last year you may have had as many as 2,000 entries from around the country. And I just wonder how many of those did you yourself actually listen to?
At least 300, maybe sometimes closer to 500. As a team, we listen to every single one of them. And Steve knows this, but we spend hours, like days, weeks, agonizing over like the top, I want to say 150 to like 200 that it really narrows down to. And from there, it's just really a matter of re-listening, discussing, and trying our best to honor the best work. But every year, it's really hard. That's the hardest part, but it's also the most fun.
And last year, I understand your middle school winner was actually a returning champion from a previous challenge?
That's right. Amaya Desai from San Francisco area. Yeah, that was the first time ever since we started the contest in the 8 years where one of our fourth grade contest winners, which was something new that we tried in 2025, came back as a middle schooler in the fifth grade category. She started with a place a lot of our students start at, interviewing her grandfather and telling her family's immigration story, to realizing that there's so many more stories of forced placement. And yeah, as a middle schooler, started a podcast where she interviewed people in her community in the Bay Area about how they came to where they are. And her second interview with Miss Linda Horikawa, who's a survivor of the Japanese incarceration camps, became our middle school winner last year. And Steve and I are both very excited about that. A lovely interview, but also really exciting to see such a young person. She's now like 11 or 12, taking on this like little opportunity and really making it her own. And I think she's working on a couple new episodes too, as we.
I think when adults or influencers, if we want to call them that, think about starting a podcast, they're looking at a series or at least something they can get several episodes out of. But one of the real freeing things about this contest is that they only have to have subject matter for one podcast. And about what length are we looking at? And tell me if there's any special theme at work this year.
We've limited them for these students to 8 minutes, which we find is generally enough time for them to tell a good story and to breathe and to also have a little bit of discipline. And yeah, this year we're adding a special prize or a special competition. July 4th, as you know, marks the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. And so we've asked students around the country to tell us what the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness means to them, or more broadly, what they feel like it means to be an American in 2026. And so we're really looking forward to seeing what students come up with. As usual, they'll surprise us.
Well, there are, of course, some rules that go along with this about copyrighted material and the use of AI, but we don't need to get down in the weeds on this. We'll have the links online on the Spotlight page at azpm.org for any interested parties. But tell us, when is the deadline coming up here, Janet?
The deadline is end of May, May 31st. So that means even if this is your first time hearing about it, you have the entire semester ahead to work on it. So I really hope you think about it. Many of our winners are first-time podcasters, so anyone can really do this, and we want to emphasize that like over and over.
For those who really want to leave their couch at home and see a film in a theater alongside other movie lovers, FilmFest Tucson has always tried to deliver unique cinematic experiences. Joining me now to explain why this year is going to be a little different is Herb Stratford, who is the lead film programmer. And then we'll share our enthusiasm for a musician you may have heard from before, a guy from Liverpool named Paul McCartney.
So FilmFest Tucson, for about 8 years, out of the last 9 years, we were doing an October weekend festival. For 25 and 26, we have pivoted into doing a new year-long screening series with Arizona Arts Live on the U of A campus at Moroney Hall.
So to be clear, although the first film we'll talk about did premiere at Telluride.
Arizona premiere, yeah.
These will be the Arizona theatrical premieres.
Yes.
And then not long after, they'll go to streaming and people can see them that way. But
or
if
even
you want
theaters.
To see it,
yeah.
Yeah, want to see it in the social environment of the theater, like the olden days.
Yes.
This is your chance. So Man on the Run, which is about Paul McCartney's second decade of stardom after the Beatles had broken up, throughout the 70s as he's doing his solo career, his career with Linda as his partner, and also the band Wings. And it's very visually striking. Talk a little bit about the style of the film.
Sure. This is directed by Morgan Neville, who, of course, won the Academy Award for 20 Feet from Stardom. He also did Won't You Be My Neighbor, the Fred Rogers documentary. He has a niche of working in sort of contemporary music. And one of the things I think that Morgan does so well is that marriage of, when you're doing a documentary about music, a lot of it's about the music, right? So how do you keep the visuals? And what's interesting, to your point, is there's some really interesting and bold choices being taken in terms of the animation of this film. And it's sort of, it's not distracting. It feels like it's additive. And it feels like instead of just showing sort of a parade of dusty old black and white photographs from the band in the 70s touring, there's an activation that happens with the color and the motion and the activity of this animation. And I think it adds to that experience because Paul also, when you think about, Yellow Submarine and some of the things in the Beatles, they were also a very visual band. They were very in tune with the visual elements long before MTV.
Mm-hmm. I have outed myself on the show before and to you in emails as a Beatleologist, an obsessive, compulsive Beatle fan who wanted to know everything I could possibly learn about the Beatles for probably 20 years of my life. Herb, would you call yourself an obsessive Beatles fan? And one way or the other, what do you think you took away from this documentary that was new to you about Paul McCartney?
I think, yes, the answer is I am an obsessive Beatles fan. They will always have a place in my heart, and I continue to go back to Beatles songs for comfort. But also, Wings to me was very important. I came to Wings a little bit later. But first time I went to Europe by myself when I was 18 years old, I had a Walkman and a bunch of Wings cassettes. And so to me, there's just burned into my mind sort of these memories where the music is the soundtrack to these things.
Was one of them London Town by any chance?
Of course it was. Of course it was. And so, for me, hearing the story behind Wings, Wings Over America was such a huge, iconic thing for me. I still listen to that album. And so I think I came away with a greater sort of appreciation for the lore and, not just the surface things. There's so much more depth here. And also, I think for the Beatles sort of person who's like a fanatic, digging a little bit deeper, we've all heard how the Beatles broke up, but it's nice to sort of hear Paul talk about it and to talk about the lawyers and the other stuff that happened and how he took the blame and how he just sort of went up to hide in the Scottish Highlands. Today, we think Rolling Stones have had, a 60-year career and the Beatles had 10 years? It's just fascinating.
One of the things that director Morgan Neville chooses to do is to avoid having talking heads by not showing any talking heads. You hear people's voices and they're identified on screen with a surtitle, but you're not distracted by seeing how people look in 2025 when this film was made. One of the voices that comes out in support of Paul and defending his early albums like Ram and McCartney is Sean Ono Lennon, who is apparently a big fan.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting you caught that as well. I've known Morgan since 2013, so that's one of the reasons we were able to get this is I approached Morgan for it. But he told me he interviewed Paul 6 times. And so when I saw the movie, when it was over, I turned to my wife and I said, we never saw Paul on camera in contemporary footage. And I said, I think that actually was a really smart artistic move. The Beatles, because of the coverage that they had, he could make a movie without showing contemporary images. And I think it did keep you it kept you in the moment when you were just listening. Sometimes I'm like, oh, is this contemporary or is this old interviews? But yeah, I think that was an interesting choice. And I think it added to the enjoyment of the movie for me.
Herb, tell me about the other films that are going to be part of this 3-film series.
So our second film is Kabali and the Tiki Mug Obsession. And this is a documentary about, ironically, a local man who has decided to build a tiki bar as sort of a speakeasy off of his existing restaurant and bar up in Oro Valley. And it follows him not only building this bar, but it sort of dives into the tiki sort of obsession. And, there's Kon-Tiki here in town as another tiki bar, but all over the world, there's bars in San Diego and just in Florida, everywhere there are tiki bars. And that's a culture of sort of that Polynesian sort of, rum drinks and sort of, escapism. And so this documentary, it's sort of parallel tracks of showing what it takes to build this remarkable bar, but then also interviewing people, Todd Rundgren, all kinds of different people who are tiki aficionados, and seeing them and sort of having them explain why it just resonates with people and where it came from and how it started. And so that's we'll have the director there, Josh Dragotta, for that screening, and that is in March 29th.
Okay, disclosure, Herb, do you own a tiki mug?
I do. I have several. I'm not like an obsessive collector, but I do have a couple, yes.
Keep Tucson unique, save the tiki.
I like it. I like it. And then our third film in this spring is called If These Walls Could Rock. And this is Tyler Measom. He is a director who, his last film was I Want My MTV, about the history of MTV. So he's very versed in sort of rock and roll mythology. And this is about the Sunset Marquis Hotel in Los Angeles. And this was, along with the Hyatt House, was the hotels that all the bands used to stay in LA. And so it's a documentary about this hotel that has hosted the Stones and the Beatles and just anybody who was in rock and roll came to LA. They stayed at the Sunset Marquis. So it's a very interesting rock doc, but also told from the perspective of, sort of what happens when they're not on stage.
Thanks to Herb Stratford of FilmFest Tucson. We have a link for more information about the screenings of these 3 films on the Spotlight page at azpm.org. There can be something very powerful about a single voice sharing a true story. It's a chance for the storyteller to let their personality shine and forge new and unexpected connections with anyone listening. In support of this important community tradition, Arizona Spotlight will feature a different local storyteller on the 3rd Thursday of each month. Here's Tony Paniagua to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Mark. Our storyteller this month is Ethel Lee Miller, who is originally from New York. Lee Miller is a writer, public speaker, storyteller, and happy Tucsonan since moving here in 2009 with her husband, Hank. Ethel was a school teacher for 28 years and loved to get children excited about crafting and owning their own stories. She's involved with several groups in our area, including Odyssey Storytelling, Artists Standing Strong Together, Tucson Tellers of Tales, and the Eastside Tucson Writing Room. Here is Ethel Lee Miller.
My story is called Ivan and the French Fries. The real Casey in this story must be a teenager now, but the story was told to me by her father, and it just stayed with me. I've often used it as an example of family. You'll see. Ivan and the French Fries. The kitchen clock showed 11:30 a.m. Casey was having one of those days. For an energetic 3-year-old, this meant every toy was out of her toy box. She had already had 2 emotional meltdowns by lunchtime, and there was more food in her hair than in her mouth. Her mom, Terry, had just dashed out the door to her Saturday job down at the hardware store. Her flurry of kisses and goodbyes lingered in the house along with the scent of Lily of the Valley perfume. She had to be the only woman under the age of 35 who still wore Lily of the Valley. Ivan was also having one of those days. For a 35-year-old dad, this meant he was late for his weekend job. His work gloves had disappeared into that black hole that also takes single socks, and he wasn't going to have any lunch. He searched for the gloves while singing along with Casey. She was on to a new finger play song from preschool that required those hand movements. Open, shut them, open, shut them. She followed along behind him with her sing-song voice. Do it with me, Daddy. Come on, do the hands. I'll show you how. Before he knew it, the kitchen clock read 11:45, and he had to punch in at noon. Putting Casey back in her chair, he reached for his jacket. When Casey saw him buttoning up the Andes Automotive Supply jacket, her eyes widened. Every time Daddy put on that shirt, he disappeared. You stay here, Daddy. Casey's voice pierced his frantic search. No work. He could tell by the pitch of her voice that she was nearing another round of crying. Where was that babysitter? Honey, I have to go. Here, have some of your French fries. No. A French fry flew through the air and landed neatly near the ivy plant. Casey, Ivan crossed the small kitchen and patted her curly brown hair. Her big eyes were looking up at him imploringly. He sat next to her chair and reached for another fry. "Daddy, why do you go to work every day?" Ivan leaned back in the chair, running a hand through his dark, wavy hair. How to explain economics to a 3-year-old? Bills to pay, a mortgage, the unexpected car repair. Raising a child meant expenses, more expenses than one salary could cover. But raising a child also meant storytelling and singing songs and finger plays with hugs and kisses. Casey, she was their first child, and he could never fully describe the incredible pride he felt, his joy at this miracle that he and Terry had created. His growing sense of accomplishment in his professional career and his confusion and frustration at being away from his family on weekends. His career was taking off fine, but he was still at the entry level, which meant part-time work at the automotive store, Saturdays and Sundays. And then scrubbing with brown soap to get the oil and grease out for Monday morning at the accounting firm. Casey was getting restless, calling "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy" in that quick rat-a-tat cadence that kids have. "Daddy, why work?" "Well, honey, I need to work to make money for our family." "Why?" "To pay bills." No, that's wrong. She doesn't know what bills are. Casey slid down from her chair and crawled up on his lap. She laced her little fingers between his larger ones. "What's bills?" He cast about for a suitable explanation. "Well," he said as he disentangled their hand connection and reached for the lunch, "to buy you French fries." Casey looked up at her dad. She looked down at the French fries. Her pudgy little hand reached out and slowly but firmly pushed the French fry dish as far away as her arm could reach. "Okay, Daddy, no more French fries." Casey sighed, a sweet, contented sigh, and leaned her head on his outstretched arm. The clock ticked, 11:54.
If you would like to see and hear from Ethel Lee Miller in person, she'll be the featured storyteller at Tucson Tellers of Tales on Sunday, March 1st, beginning at 2 p.m. For more information about Ethel Lee Miller and various storytelling organizations, we'll have links on our website. For Arizona Spotlight, I'm Tony Paniagua.
Thank you for listening to Arizona Spotlight. This show is a production of AZPM and is posted weekly at azpm.org. The production engineer is Jim Blackwood. Production assistance by Sarah Ariano. I'm producer and host Mark McLemore.
This has been an original production of AZPM News.